Hello, I'm Breena Clarke, and I'd like to read an excerpt of River Cross My Heart. I'm going to read a portion of chapter 11. In this section, 10-year-old Johnny Mae Bynum, her mother Alice, and her teacher, Miss Elizabeth Boston, pay a call after church services to meet the newly arrived Hattie Miller and her daughter Pearl. In the chapter, Hattie Miller tells her visitors about Tulsa, Oklahoma, and some of the events that happened in 1921. You've just recently moved to Georgetown? Miss Boston asked. Yes, ma'am, Hattie Miller answered. May I ask where you've come from, Mrs. Miller? Alice Bynum asked. We come from the territory. We come from Oklahoma Territory, Miss Bynum. Oh my, that's very intriguing. Elizabeth Boston prided herself on the words in her vocabulary that added the scalloped edges of adventure and passion to mundane thoughts. Intriguing was one of these. Though Mr. Ernest Boston, her father, was always on the road with the railroad, her own traveling had been limited. All of it had been done in the pages of books and by the tales told by her father and the people she met. In all her years, she'd left Georgetown only once to visit some of her people in Philadelphia. My nearest people are buried in the state of Oklahoma, Hattie Miller said. How come you all to be out that way, Mrs. Miller? Alice Bynum asked. That's way out west, isn't it? There are a great many Indians out there, Mrs. Miller. Miss Boston blurted out. Yes, ma'am, a great many. We number some of our people among them. Our folks have been out on the frontier since emancipation. I declare, Miss Boston said. My papa's papa brought himself and a wagon load of folks out there as soon as they said he was free to go. He swore he wanted to strike out for where things were new to him. The woman who birthed my papa was a full-blooded Creek, miss. I declare, Alice Bynum exclaimed. I declare, Elizabeth Boston chimed in. And do you consider yourself to be one of the Creeks? Miss Boston asked. I don't do much considering on that, miss. We had our entitlements, though, same as the rest of the Creeks. Entitlements? Our parcel of land from the government. All of the Creeks got title to a plot of land, and we did too, on account of my papa's mama was a Creek. My nearest people are buried beneath that land, though it doesn't belong to me anymore. Hattie rubbed the head of a fat cherub carved on the arm of the chair she sat in. The cherub had identical brothers on each of the arms and finials of the room's dark furniture. She looked into Elizabeth Boston's face, whose smooth tan skin was alight with interest above the eyebrows and along the tops of her cheeks. Hattie wondered at the frank show of curiosity by a young woman so determinedly proper and corseted. Pearl's papa and my papa were shot trying to face off a mob of grafters. That was after 21, after the big rioting and burning in Tulsa in 1921. These grafters were bent on taking the entitlement and showing us a lesson too. I buried Papa and my husband. They're out there, laying right now in the state of Oklahoma. Alice Bynum, too, hung on Hattie Miller's words. She had heard plenty about the burning of Tulsa in 21. My husband and my cousin and her husband were planning to go out to Oklahoma, but we came here instead. Oh my. Miss Boston could barely conceal her eagerness for more of the tale. Elizabeth Boston had a wandering, inquiring mind. Mostly it was reading that gave her the chance to roam vicariously, but a fondness for combing the backgrounds of people newly met supplied excitement too. Before James Miller, my husband and my Pearl's papa, had got cool in the ground, a gentleman I thought was right nice came to call on me. I was scared, being a woman alone with a young girl. I took up with him for protection. We went to the justice of the peace and got a marriage ceremony. Shortly after, he ran off from us, and I was turned off the place. I tell you, I cried a bucketful that day. Not wanting to take her eyes from Hattie Miller's face, the school teacher nevertheless flicked her eyes toward the kitchen, concerned that Pearl and Johnny May were listening. Hattie Miller seemed not the least inhibited in telling her sad story. See, that man I married with, he had been put up to marry me and get the claim to my entitlement to give up to the grafters. Little Pearl and I had to leave there with just the things you see here and our clothes. My people had a mighty lot of things my papa made. He was a carpenter. He made all his own things. Most of it were farming things, and we just left them behind. Alice Bynum asked, "Did your father make all of this furniture here, Mrs. Miller?" "Yes, ma'am. He was a master carpenter." The frontier, Oklahoma. It sounds so colorful, so exciting, so free, said Miss Boston. "I don't know about that, miss. There was a sense that we owned, that we belonged there. We heard that colored owned lots of land there, that colored had their own towns, their own sheriffs and all," Alice questioned eagerly. "Yes, indeed. You want to see some towns? You just look at Tecumseh and Boley and some others. These towns were full of our folk. Our folk ran those towns and plenty others. And you ought to have seen Tulsa. Ah, there was plenty of colored there, big Negroes. I met my husband there. A couple times a year, Papa hauled a dresser or a chaperone or a table to sell to the big Negroes that lived up there. We were going to settle out there, me and Willie, my husband and my cousin Ina and her husband Cap, but we heard about the trouble and changed our mind," said Alice. "I met my husband in Tulsa. He was shining shoes for the oil people and hanging out in the joints drinking Choctaw beer. That stuff used to turn folks crazy. It was worse than moonshine liquor. Papa convinced him to come out to our place and work it. James Miller was kind of a city boy at that time, but he wasn't too smart. He got so that he did the farm work as well as Papa, and he got to like it real well. Pearl was born and raised on that place, and I put two other little ones in the ground down there, then my husband and Papa. Pearl and I left there and went up to Tulsa when we got turned out. I kind of wanted to stay, but the Reverend said Tulsa was no kind of town for a young widow with a girl child, especially a widow who had already been fooled. Tulsa is a wide open town. He told us Washington City was a better place for us. I didn't really want to leave Tulsa, but I went along with the Reverend say so. You ought to have heard the bands that played in Tulsa. They had the brass band, bands that played at the dances, the carnivals and all. They had great lines of men walking and playing their horns. Thank you. If you enjoyed this excerpt of River Cross My Heart, I urge you to listen to the complete audiobook, which there's a new audiobook version that's available at recordedbooks.com. And Karen Chilton is the narrator, and she does a wonderful job. Thank you.